It's 1 o'clock. Would you like to get started? Is it Paul, you're starting us off? Or is that Tim? Sorry.
Tim is starting us off.
Okay. Tim, would you like to get us started?
If I remember to unmute my video, my audio, I'd love to do that. Hi, everyone. On behalf of the SUNY Office of Library and Information Services, the SUNY Center for Professional Development, and all of the staff at SUNY Press, I'm delighted to kick off this webinar, which is intended to showcase some of the stellar ways that humanities faculty from across the SUNY system are incorporating digital pedagogy in their classrooms. Today's session will feature 8 different presentations, and our hope is that this webinar will spark ideas and strategies that all of our attendees will find valuable. The genesis for this workshop came from a series of discussions that a few of us have been having over the past few months about ways that we can begin to build a community of practice around innovative teaching and learning in the humanities. Today's webinar is a kickoff event for what we hope can become a regularly scheduled opportunity for interested faculty to gather and share ideas. I'd like to thank some of my colleagues who were responsible for organizing today's session, including Paul Schott, a pioneer in digital humanities, SUNY Geneseo, Mark McBride, the Senior Library Strategist from the Office of Library and Information Services, Amanda Baker, who has been assisting both SUNY Press and OLIS with special projects for the past few months, and of course, Chris Price and Jamie Herron from the CPD, who were instrumental in helping us translate our ideas into a workable agenda for today's webinar. As an acclaimed international publisher of distinguished research and notable works of general interest since 1966, SUNY Press supports the commitments of the State University of New York to teaching, research, and public service. Capitalizing on the latest advances in digital communication, the press offers an innovative range of print and electronic publications to fulfill the evolving needs of scholars, students, authors, and readers. Over the years, we've developed a particularly strong reputation for our academic monographs and special collections that we've published in many different disciplines in the humanities. And for that reason, we are looking for ways that we can extend our reach into the SUNY system to become even more of a go-to resource for faculty members who are interested in publishing their research and learning materials. This past summer, we launched a brand new imprint. We call it 64 Ink, and you see it on our screen there. 64 Ink is dedicated to exactly that kind of support. While the press is primarily focused on research books and journals in the past, it is our hope that our new 64 Ink imprint can allow us a broader reach into additional services that we can offer SUNY faculty to tap into to help them with all of their publishing needs. Today's webinar is a very good example of that. Another good example are the textbook projects that we've recently taken over from SUNY OER Services, where 64 Ink is now providing print and premium digital offerings for more than 59 different SUNY courses being taught this fall. So that's the commercial. To find out more about 64 Ink or SUNY Press, please visit our website, www.sunypress.edu, or feel free to email me directly after today's webinar. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Jamie to kick off the rest of today's sessions. I hope you all enjoy.
Thanks, Tim. So my name's Jamie Herron. I'm from the SUNY Center for Professional Development. I just want to take one moment to do a couple housekeeping items. We have captioning available for those of you who would like that. I'm going to post the link here in the chat. The presenters are going to present for about 6 minutes, and then they will be addressing questions for approximately 4 minutes after their presentation. I will be reading those questions from the chat for the presenter, and at the 10-minute mark, we'll switch from one presenter to the next. If there are unanswered questions, the presenters are going to address those questions within the chat itself. With that being said, I'm going to hand the reins over to Rasolofo. I hope I did that right. And thanks for joining us today, everyone.
It should have already started. Using Google Street View.
Okay, so thank you, Jamie. You pronounced it right. So good afternoon, everyone. in our French beginning courses, we aim at gradual increase of students' confidence in their language production. To this end, we integrate grammar previously practiced into real-life settings. We follow the approach that language is learned best through actual communication. The goal is to have students participate in actual community as well as collaborate with other like-minded when it comes to cultural topics. So the course uses cultural topics offered in the textbook as a starting point of the actual life setting. We use the American, we use the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages Standards as our guideposts to lead students to communicate effectively in more than one language in order to function in a variety of situations and for multiple purposes, to have them interact with cultural competence and understanding, to connect with other disciplines and acquire information and diverse perspectives in order to use the language to function in academic and career-related situations, to compare and develop insights into the nature of language and culture in order to interact with cultural competence. And finally, to communicate and interact with cultural competence in order to participate in a multilingual communities. So students choose from various interests mentioned in the text. So in the case here, I underlined them, possible interests. And for the presentation, I circled le cours Mirabeau. So once the students are settled in their interest, they make a Google Street View search, like here, and they will receive a map view, both map view and a street view. So they're going to use that information with the vocabulary that they learned, as well as their experiences, to fulfill the following tasks. First, they are asked to describe the location, talk about the people, if there is any there, talk about nature, if there is any, what is the atmosphere of the place. Then they will present what they like most or what they didn't like about the location. They discuss their preferences. Third, they compare the Google Street View with location, with where they study or they live. And fourth, they connect the cultural topic with their major or courses they took before or courses they are taking now. Some of them might be going there for study abroad, for example. And finally, they discuss the appreciation of the cultural community and their experience during the program. It can be written using different venues, but personally, I prefer oral participation. Eventually, groups of students can create a story in parallel of the textbook. And also, hopefully, their presentations will convince other students to sign up for French or foreign language courses. To conclude, The following are my recommendations for a project with Google Street View. First, the good part. Google Street View is a very good realia as far as culture is concerned, because it brings the cultural part of foreign language instruction alive. Also, because both map view and street view can be simultaneously displayed, and also students have the option to have a 360 view of that particular location. They have a better geographical orientation than the textbook can offer. And this is a plus because it expands their practice even further. Third, occasionally the same location can be shown at different time of the day. And this is something that the textbook cannot provide. Now, the flip of the coin. Sometimes it is difficult to pinpoint a location that the student visited before. So it is wise to copy and save the URL once the student decides on a particular location. Also, sometimes not all points of interest are mentioned in the textbook. So for example, here, Exxon Music, we were not able to find that. However, the good part is it expanded the search. The student was able to expand the search and discovered something else not mentioned in the text. And finally, it seems that the image stayed there for a while on Google Street View. But I wonder that if we come back in a few months, I wonder whether we're still going to have the same picture and settings. One thing is sure is that we do not have control of how long the image is going to be available there. But in overall, the experience with Google Street View was satisfactory, and I do it again with my students for the cultural part. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Ando. Do we have any questions? I'll happily read them from the chat. While we're waiting to see if there are any questions, if Chelsea, you'd like to share your screen. There's a question here. Have you tried having the students find a place using directions in a foreign language?
I haven't. Do you mean using French in the search? That's the language that they use. They use the language that we are using in class to do their search.
Allison, if you'd like to clarify your question in the chat. And perhaps you answered the question, Anda.
Okay, all right.
If there aren't any other questions, we'll move on to, oh wait, sorry. There's a question from Sheila. Are there some country images that are not available?
My experience so far, not. That was in France, which is pretty common, but there was another instance where we did countries in Africa, and we were successful. Lately we did La Martinique, which is the island in the Pacific Ocean, Atlantic Ocean. We were successful as well.
Great.
So far we haven't get into a problem like that so far, crossing fingers.
So there's another question for you, Ando, but we're at our 10 minutes. So if you would
Oh,
address
okay.
that in the chat, and we're going to
Sure.
switch over to Chelsea. Thanks for joining us today, Chelsea.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and thank you everybody who's here. Thank you for the SUNY Center for Professional Development for hosting this. So I'm just going to jump right into it. So my name's Chelsea Gibson. I am a visiting assistant professor at Binghamton University, and I teach history. So I just want to know, I seem to be the only one on the list that is a historian, but I hope that this is going to give you some ideas that maybe you can translate into other types of classes. Although this is a kind of a thing that I've designed specifically for a history classroom. So what I'm going to talk about today is using the Timeline JS system basically as a final project in my classes. I basically use this as a replacement for a final exam, and I'll explain why I do that. So the first thing that we need to do is talk a little bit about what Timeline JS is. I will share the link to the Google presentation when I get done so that you can have these hyperlinks in my information. But Timeline.js is basically an open source tool that allows students to create an interactive timeline, which means that they input the data, they input the dates, they input pictures, they input like picture captions and things like that. And the only thing that it has on its back end is an Excel spreadsheet. So it's pretty simple to use, even if a student has never used an Excel spreadsheet before, which admittedly is about 80% of them, they can still start using this within about 30 minutes. I typically dedicate one class period, which is about an hour to an hour and a half, depending on the class I'm teaching, and I'm able to get students working with this almost immediately. You may have already encountered things that were created through the Timeline.js software, because places like CNN uses it, Time Magazine uses it. You'll see it on a lot of different websites across the web. So what I do as the assignment is, in my classes, I will allow students to choose one of many oral history interviews. So I taught a class on the Cold War, and students could pick from Black Panther interviews, feminist interviews, Vietnam veteran interviews. I also use this in a class on Soviet history, and by some grace of the Soviet gods, there is a digitized database of sociological interviews done with Soviet refugees after the Second World War that are in English, typed up and digitized. So what I'm doing in this is I'm taking digital sources that are already out there. I'm double checking that these institutions will allow my students to use them in a kind of digital facing project, which most of them will. And I allow students to pick an interview out of these kind of that I've already identified for them. So students will pick these interviews, and then they will go to make their timeline slides. And I'm going to show you an example of this very quickly at the end of this presentation. Basically, each slide, I have students put about 150 words. They have to make 13 to 20 slides. What students do is they choose images, videos, music, or maps or other things to go along with this text. And that text has to be both analytical and descriptive. So students are basically taking the life of someone, and they are choosing a way to present that narrative. And then they're restructuring it and presenting it in this timeline system with an eye to the way that this person's story reflects the larger history of this moment. So the major goals of this assignment, if I can tie them to the ones that the SUNY Center for Professional Development posed to us, well, some of these goals that I have are inclusion, transparency, and engagement. So one of the great things about this project is that it's synthetic, which is why I use it as a final, kind of a final exam replacement. Students basically take one person's life and they use it to prove the mastery of course content. So when I taught a class on gender in the Cold War, my students took an oral history interview and they analyzed it both through a historical lens, like how does this tell us more about the Cold War, and through a gendered lens. What does this tell us about, gender roles in this period? Similarly, when I did it with Soviet history, they had to tell me what this told them about Stalin's kind of time in power in the Soviet Union. This is also a student-centric kind of assignment, which means students can pick a topic that is most relevant to them and explore it. So they are both fulfilling this kind of synthetic goal, but they're also allowing themselves to choose somebody that represents them in some cases. So when I did my Gender in the Cold War class, I had, you know, a Muslim student who chose a Muslim feminist to talk about. I had Black students choosing Black feminists or Black Panthers, people that maybe they wouldn't get to explore in any detail in a normal classroom setting due to time constraints or just our lack of ability to kind of get really in depth into personal histories, and they can personalize it. This also really importantly teaches digital literacy, because I require my students to only use things that have a Creative Commons license or are in the public domain. So they have to learn how to read licenses, which is something students say, I hate this, it's really annoying, but oh my goodness, it's very useful. And I've never thought about where I got images before on the internet. So I think that's one of the best goals and purposes of this. It's research focused, so you're forcing them to put somebody's life in a historical context, and it's focused on historical analysis. So it's also in that way making students prove a change over time, which is something that as a historian, I want them to do. So they're basically taking an interview that might go from 1965 back to 1932 up to 2005, and they're forced to order it, and they're forced to kind of put it into this kind of rational narrative. I also have them do outside research that they integrate into this timeline. So I want to note that my colleagues have used this in other classes that I've shared it with, and they've done something that isn't tied to oral histories. I've had a colleague who studies the history of prostitution, and she had students pick a city of their choosing and tell the history of prostitution in that city. I also have a colleague who did a class on popular culture, and she had them pick one element of popular culture in the 20th century and trace it over time. So we're still getting this nice change over time kind of thing that historians really like. So what does this look like? This is my last kind of thing. I'm going to show this one actually. So if you go all the way back to a timeline, so this is what makes it interactive. The students picked whatever picture they want, they put the text here, and they order it on some sort of chronological makeup, right? So we have the pictures, we have the text, and you go through and they narrate the student's life, and you're able to interact with them. And as I said, students can use videos. So this one links directly to YouTube. Students, if they really get into this, they change the colors, they change the font size. It's really personalizable. No, that's not the word, but students are able to make it what they want. They really get into this. I get very good student responses from it, and I think it's a really successful project. More student examples can be found on my personal website, and I will stop there. Thank you guys for your attention.
Thanks, Chelsea. Does anybody have any questions for Chelsea? While we're waiting, I actually have a question for Chelsea. Is
Sure,
this, can students collaborate on this tool together?
Absolutely, yeah, because the back end is just an Excel spreadsheet, and it's made in Google Excel specifically, so they have to use Google Sheets. Okay. So they can have a shared Google Sheet between them and collaborate on it for sure.
Okay, great. So we have Cindy saying, Chelsea, thank you. This is a great tool and really exciting to hear how you use it. Then Allison asked, can you go back to your personal website? And Ed shared that for you here in the chat. So thank you, Ed.
I will definitely, like I said, I'll post the link to this entire Google slide once I'm done, so you have access to all that too.
And it sounds like you have a couple fellow historians here. There was someone earlier in the chat who indicated you're a historian as well. Have you also pivoted data into other tools from NightLab, like StoryMap, etc.?
I personally haven't used StoryMap because I've found Timeline to be more useful for the projects I've so far created. But I have played with NightLab, like I have used the other ones. They basically have a very similar backend from my understanding, but I would highly recommend other tools like that, like StoryMap. The reason I haven't done it is because typically with StoryMap, you need to have a very big image that will be able to like handle all of the digital rendering. And for oral histories, like it's very difficult to know where people are in one place in time if they don't explain it. So creating a map felt a lot harder than creating a timeline.
Okay, great. And we have a couple more questions, and we're not going to be able to get to them all in 30 seconds, but one here I have for you. I just lost it because we have so many people now asking questions. Does Timeline.js work well with CMS like Drupal, WordPress, and or Omeka or others?
I'm not sure about like Omeka and other things. I know that you can host it, I think, on WordPress. I haven't tried to integrate it with any of those other systems, but I think that they are compatible. It might just take you exploring it on your own.
Great. All right, so we are going to switch, if you wouldn't mind, Chelsea, addressing the remainder of the questions, which they started coming in fast and furious here into the chat. If you could respond to those, and we're going to switch over to Amanda Wentworth and Ed Beck.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our presentation, and thank you to the SUNY Center for Professional Development for hosting us today. We're going to be talking about Commons in a Box OpenLab at SUNY Oneonta and SUNY Geneseo, which we consider open solutions for common challenges. My name is Amanda Wentworth, and I'm the Digital Humanities and Learning Coordinator for the Center for Digital Learning at Geneseo.
And I'm Ed Beck, and I'm an instructional designer in our Teaching Learning Technology Center. So this project, looking into Commons in the Box, actually grew out of another project that we did piloted last year. Last year, we did a full domains of one own setup shared between some different colleges, including SUNY Oneonta and SUNY Geneseo. And, you know, the best thing and the worst thing about the setup that we had last year was just the amount of choices that we could provide to the students. In a domains of one own setup, each student can operate their own server, and it gives them the opportunity to learn a little bit about how the modern web works. So it gets them to ask a really technical question like, what's a LAMP stack? How do I set up SSL on my server? And teaching really high-level digital skills at the same time as we let students create content. But if we're being honest, though, about what really worked well from last year, a lot of our best work just came out of WordPress. And so we were starting to look at solutions that really went into that and were really focused on WordPress-based solutions, which would give us something that would simplify it for students while still giving some of the same experience that we got from last year's project. And that's how we really got into looking at OpenLab. And OpenLab was something that was built by CUNY, in collaboration with a bunch of different foundations that helped fund this work. But at its basic level, it's trying to create an open digital commons for like a higher ed institution.
So with this innovative platform now in the back of our minds, a Geneseo faculty member called Lytton Smith, shown here in his OpenLab profile picture, approached the Center for Digital Learning for assistance and guidance on setting up a way for students participating in Geneseo's Center for Integrative Learning's Individualized Studies major to create, own, customize, and share portfolios that track their progress through the major. So now we have a case where we can map that faculty member's ask to what OpenLab can provide us with. So there's a desire for a single central site on the Center for Integrative Learning at Geneseo that links to public customizable portfolios for each student, as well as incorporates built-in branding throughout the site and its child sites, which are the portfolios. OpenLab can provide all of this as well as more streamlined technical process for students. It's essentially a one-stop shop. Students can control their sharing permissions for their portfolios, which is a huge win for privacy concerns. And perhaps the most exciting feature of all of this is the portability of the portfolios. So they can be exported and reused as WordPress sites in the future by these students after they graduate from Geneseo. So here's a snapshot of the homepage for Geneseo's OpenLab instance. As you can see, I was able to properly color and brand the site in that header there, which runs throughout all of the site's pages and child pages. There are different types of sites offered by the OpenLab platform, and you can see them listed at the top there: courses, organizations, projects, and portfolios. Each of these groups can be linked to their own specific and unique WordPress site accessible outside of this platform.
So if we get through looking at examples, This is a student portfolio that they're making in OpenLab. This is actually an intern that's working with my center during this year, and I believe she's on the call. And what I want to bring focus to is what I put in the bottom left-hand corner. What's different about the OpenLab system compared to some of these other things that we've tried in the past is even though students are creating using a public tool, they have those privacy settings where they can say, I want this to be public, I want this to be only available to the student community, or I only want this available to me and my instructor because I'm just doing this for the assignment, but I don't want to be out there on the public web. You know, we said we have individual portfolios, we have projects. So our history department at SUNY Oneonta decided they wanted to do some archive work themselves during this pandemic. And they said, I want a site that many students can post on where we can do diary entries sharing what's going on during this last 9 months. And to this point, we've had 135 students post on this Pandemic Diaries project, sharing what they're thinking about, what they're feeling, and what it's like during this. And this is kind of based after a project in London to take care of, to archive the feelings after World War II. So they're teaching a little bit of history and also trying to archive this current moment.
Yes, and it's a very cool website. Highly recommend checking it out and going through those stories. So we set up this project so that the CIL is an organization and the individualized studies major is a course, and the students who are members of these groups can link to their individual portfolios right off of the group homepage, which is shown on the right side of this page. Additionally, from this course group homepage, you can access the course site, you can access a unique discussion forum, a course calendar, you can access course docs, files, and you can see all of the members specifically.
So what we're thinking about with this is that not this is all that creative a project all in itself, but what this is the structure that other creative projects can be built on top. Yesterday, SUNY Empire State presented about their IITG grant, about how they were using WordPress with a buddy press site to try to connect students that were feeling a little remote during this time. And this was their goal of creating one space that was kind of social. Clubs and organizations can use OpenLab. We know portfolios are a high impact practice. In OpenLab, students can not only have portfolios, but link them to classes and organizations so that then they can share. And in those classes, you can have a little minimal grading done where you can use posts as assignments and things like that. So that can be really nice. And then a space for those ad hoc projects or cross-disciplinary projects that aren't always easy to fit into the spaces that we've traditionally provided for classes like the LMS, because it doesn't really enable that cross-class or that cross-curricular collaborations like OpenLab does. In the Pandemic Diaries project right now, the most recent 3 or 4 diaries are both in Spanish and English, because a Spanish instructor is asking her students to post diaries in Spanish and then translate those into English about what they're doing and how they're feeling. And that's the kind of thing that wouldn't be possible gated into the LMS.
Absolutely. So thank you very much for joining us with this today. And we can turn to questions now.
Great. So are there any questions here in the chat that I can address to Amanda and Ed? Thank you for sharing the link there, Ed. Ed shared a link to one of his favorite projects in the chat for people to check out.
You know, the presentation that came before us about the timeline JS, on our Oneonta OpenLab, we have installed H5P, and H5P incorporated the timeline JS into its system. It still looks exactly the same, but they've built it so it is built into WordPress. That would be an awesome project to then start to build that repository as a project on a place that could be then seen, and then let the students decide if they would like to share it or not share it. If, you know, this was my final project and I'm just going to use it for that, or I want this shared and seen by other people to be a new resource. And that's what kind of fun things are possible with OpenLab.
Great. So Sarah indicated she pasted the pandemic diaries into the Blackboard, her Blackboard shelf for students to see. Paula asks, Ed, could you talk a little bit about the ease or difficulty of setting this up if a campus is interested? And you've got 40 seconds.
So we used our setup from Reclaim Hosting. So from Reclaim, we were able to have a one-click installer to be able to do that. And then we started customizing it from the back end. We did have some things where we had to go through, and we set ours up so that we had subdomains. It's not the easiest thing to set up in the world, but it's manageable. And it's manageable for someone like me, who's not a server administrator, but just an instructional designer that likes this kind of thing. And what I see in OpenLab is I've taken on the work. I can set up the back end and brand the full site so that faculty don't have to worry about the full aspect of creating a site, and they can just focus on smaller things and chunks that closely align to their content.
Great, thanks. And if anyone else has any questions for Ed and Amanda, please feel free to post in the chat. They'll address them there. And we have Chris, I'm sorry, Chris, I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name, joining us from SUNY Cortland, as well as Arien Rozelle from St. John Fisher College. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello, thanks so much for having us. I'm Arien Rozelle from St. John Fisher. This is my co-presenter.
I'm Chris Badurek from So we're here to talk a little bit about integrating GIS with some historical data that Arien was working on in her public relations courses.
So we're talking about women's suffrage strategy, mapping New York State suffrage organizations and conventions with web GIS. So I am not a historian. I'm a public relations professor, and I'm really interested in the role of public relations in activist causes and social movements. And as we approached the centennial of the 19th Amendment, I was looking at the suffrage movement and thinking about how they clearly used public relations strategies and tactics. And much has been written about the tactics of the suffrage movement, but less has been written about the overall broad strategy. How did they manage to put it all together? So while not often examined in this context, the suffrage movement really was one of the most successful and longest running public relations campaigns in history. So we know that suffragists sought to change attitudes and beliefs about women's rights, and geography played a key role in their PR and political strategy. So in the course of my research, so I was doing a lot of research because I'm putting an honors course together about this topic. I came across this wonderful book, Women Will Vote, which was actually written by two SUNY professors. And while I'm not a SUNY faculty, I'm a proud SUNY grad, by the way. So in this book, they talk about New York's role in the suffrage movement and eventually the passage of the 19th Amendment. And in the appendix, they had some wonderful data sets. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could map these as part of a assignment for my honors course? And so we have Appendix 1 was about where the suffrage conventions were, and 2 was about the political groups and organizations across the state. All right, I'll turn it over to Chris.
All right, so now I'll talk a little bit about using the software tools that I frequently use in my own teaching. I teach a lot of GIS type courses at Cortland. In particular, I teach a class called Web GIS, and basically uses some Esri-based software. So Esri is a GIS software tool that SUNY obviously has a site license for most campuses. It's used a lot in a lot of different mapping applications, from government to environmental type applications. But in this case, we wanted to focus on using the web-based GIS tools that are pretty easy for most people to utilize. So once you put the data in it, you can do a lot of different things. ask questions, do queries, do analytical types of reasoning that's geographic based. So we use a tool called ArcGIS Online. So most people can create an account. And then once you have an account, you go behind the scenes and you can add data into this. Arien just mentioned the original data source. Of course, it had to be put into an Excel worksheet. Actually, it was done with a Google Sheet with her intern. And then we have to convert this data into a CSV file, right? So it doesn't actually use Excel files explicitly. They have to be converted into these other sort of intermediary data files. And once that's in there, it gets uploaded, and then you can start to begin to use some of the preset tools that are inside of the Esri suite. So basically, how this works is you can add in your CSV, but obviously a key component of anything that's geographic mapping is that we need to have some form of geographies, we often call it. So anything that could have a spatial component where it can be tied down in space. In this case, we're georeferencing these locations. It's not much of a problem when you have a town, right? They become georeferenced pretty easily. So we're looking at some of this convention history, and then we're looking at the clubs, right? They're basically based on towns. So once you add that in there with your geographies, it creates the data points for you automatically. So this gives us an example of some of what this looks like. So these are these suffrage and equality clubs covering 1880 to 1917. And basically what we have there is we have a tabular data set that you can see inside of the web map. You can also change the symbology, and the thing that's useful here is that students can move back and forth between the map view and the table view pretty easily. And this is all like on the web. People can just open it. You don't need to use any desktop application or anything like that. Pretty straightforward for most people to use once it's set up. This gives us another example of some of the things that can be done with this. So you can have the data in there, and then it automatically creates summary measures of things that might be useful, right? So in this case, I have a count of different clubs and events, right? It gives you the total. You can do some form of analytics with this. And then lastly, this is created as a web map, and then students can save it. Here's another example. This is again taking all that data, and then it does an automated aggregation of the data. So in this case, you see that we're looking at where are the most locations of these conventions, right? And they tend to be scattered across New York State, but obviously focused in New York City. You can set the parameters such that people can, or students, for example, can click on these locations. This is in Canandaigua, pretty prominent place in the history of this topic, that you can embed other forms of data into, right? So this could be linked together with a additional documents or multimedia content, right? All heat maps, which are basically clicking a button, and then you have this intensity of what's happening in terms of the data set. And then you can look at it in finer scale, right? So you can move back and forth between these different scales and get a sense of what can be done with the data views. Okay, so that's some of what you can do, and Arien will.
So to tie it all back together, with my students, why this kind of matters is that mapping can help us understand the broader strategy, so we can use this information and kind of work backwards to the locations. And then we can move forward to attempt to aggregate media placements related to where the suffrage conventions, organizations, and clubs were from a PR standpoint. This would be really painstaking, but it's a great example of how quickly technology has changed, because today we have tools and platforms that can monitor media coverage and measure it and map it in real time. So, thank you. Any questions?
Great, thanks, Arien and Chris. If anyone has any questions for either Arien or Chris, please feel free to post it in the chat. We've got 2 minutes left for this particular presentation.
One of the things I would share is that this is running sort of a base level for any H grant that's being submitted from St. John Fisher College. So that's part of the genesis of our collaboration. The idea there is to kind of look at enable students to go back and forth between different time periods, using mapping techniques to foster additional forms of questioning and other types of courses that might be interdisciplinary. That's sort of tip of the iceberg of where we're headed with that.
Any other questions? There's a question from Michael. Love seeing history in action in other fields. Do you see ways of linking this geographic presentation to historical interpretations?
Yeah. So the methods that I would think that getting together with a historian and looking at sort of the qualitative way of looking at perspective. There's obviously a lot of interest in using GIS in history, for example. So there's a number of books that have come out on the topic, and people often throw around this term deep maps, where you kind of look at the place over multiple time segments and see how the context of place changes. And the deep roots of historical, social problems, for example, a lot of different ways to explore these topics.
Great, thanks very much. I think that your audio was dropping a little bit there, so if you want to clarify perhaps in the chat, that might be helpful in response to the question. And there was a question about that transcription, and yes, I've had to restart the transcription. I'm posting the link here for anyone who needs it. We're going to move on now to Laini Kavalosk from SUNY Canton. So Laini, if you'd like to share your screen. We'll get started. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Thanks everybody for coming. I'm going to talk about a project today that I do usually in upper level classes with students that have a little bit of digital experience already, but I can talk more about how I do that. I'm a professor of English, but I also teach in our technological communications major, which is housed in the English department. And this digital design teams assignment usually takes about 6 to 7 weeks. So I usually build up to it using all kinds of different content, digital storytelling, depends on which class I teach it in, but it usually takes up a good chunk of the end of the semester, practically half of a semester, but it usually is a really great project which students invest a lot in. During those 7 weeks, students role play as critical design groups based on common research interests, which they develop around topics and readings from the earlier part of the course. The collaborative critical design process helps them to sort of build communities and empathy in games and in the classroom. Goals of the project are that they address a problem through a public-facing work. So these are going to be published on the web within a website. They're going to collaborate in teams across disciplines, and they're going to role play as these design teams. The outcome of this project is they create 5 deliverables or interdependent assignments. One is the media object itself, which is usually a small sample of a game that they create. It could also be a blog or something else if they don't want to create a game. An illustrated proposal of the project, a team website in which they upload the proposal, team information, game, etc. A little short trailer of the game or story that they build, and then a public presentation. The content varies according to class, but one of the most successful pieces of content that I've used is a course that looks at activist groups as models for activist media. And the class usually decides on the groups or texts that they would like to use. So you can really use any content for this. So you can sort of see some of the pieces here down below that students have chosen already. The Gorilla Girls, Reverend Billy and the Stop Shopping Choir, the Italian game company Mola Industrial, which does sort of parody of in games, which is a wonderful group. If you have not looked at that, it's worth looking at. So the structure of the assignment is that teams create sort of their own groups according to interests. So if we've decided, they're going to look at, 5 different activist groups, they organize themselves accordingly into what they're interested in. They choose then roles within the team. So I allow them to go ahead and organize themselves according to roles that they would like to take on. So it could be, for example, a manager, a designer, a writer, an editor, a researcher, and so forth. These deadlines, of course, have to be staggered. This is such a big project that I first have them do the proposal where they talk about the audience, the purpose, they do a mood board within the proposal. Then they create a team website, which has a particular design, logo, motto, etc. I'll show you an example in a few minutes. They create a short game, a short trailer or teaser for their game, and then they do a presentation at the very end of the semester. That's their final piece. Of course, this is a huge project. Each of these deliverables needs to have a very specific structure, outline detailed steps about each of these deliverables. So for example, as I said before, the website has to have a very particular design that fits with the game design, that fits with the proposal design, etc. That needs to have a logo that they make up, a team motto that they make up, team bios, which could be real, but they could also be fictional. Sometimes I have students go crazy and, I was born in the woods and, grew up with wolves. And that's why I'm doing this particular, animal rights game. I also have them utilize usually 1 class a week for workshop time so that they can build in the classroom. This includes also using guilds. So they work across groups. That is, so if the managers, right, from 4 different teams on 1 workshop day could get together in their guilds, the manager guild, and they can talk about challenges they've had, things that have worked in their group, etc. That often is a really great tool for them. They love doing that. And I also use just-in-time software training. So I don't give them a big chunk of software training at the beginning, but as they're working on their websites and we're in weeks, say 2 and 3, we talk about different softwares, different possibilities for creating websites, and look at some of those together. One of the tools that I often use, and I won't talk much about it, but I'm happy to answer questions, is a tool called Augmented Reality Interactive Storytelling, or ARIS. I was lucky enough to work with the Games and Learning Society at the University of Wisconsin for several years with them on this. And it's an augmented reality software that's free and open source. And so if you want to look it up and check it out, it's really fun. Students love using it, and it's fairly user-friendly. Let me show you an example of some student deliverables. So this is a screenshot of one of the designed websites that one of the teams created. This is called, they called themselves Rootbound. Motto here, you can see discovering globally, acting locally. And they have tabs about us. That's where their bios go, their clients, which is fictional. Here is a piece of their illustrated proposal, which is also up in the website. So they're talking about some of the theory that we discussed earlier in the semester, Deleuze and Guattari's rhizomatic theory, and that's why they use this design of Rootbound. And the activist group that they used was Reverend Billy and the Stop Shopping Choir, and so they created a game. These are screenshots from the phone game that they made through ARIS, and they tell us a little bit about the concept of the game. It's based in real space. I won't talk too much about it right now. I don't think we have much time, but it is a GPS-based game where students can interact with characters that pop up in certain spaces, etc. So that was really cool, and students get to try it out. Another group created a game about feminism, developing in a particular place. This was when I was still living in Wisconsin, so this was in Madison. And they looked at second wave feminism and created a team based on feminist histories in that location. So this is their logo, motto, team site. And this is sort of a description of their game. And they all did trailers. This is sort of the screen of their trailers. So again, it is a intensive project, but I think well worth doing and a lot of fun for students, and they get really invested in it. And in the end, they have a portfolio site with all these incredible deliverables, usually in it, with that they can share, you know, throughout their career or develop for other projects, and works out really well. So I'd love to take any questions if anybody has them.
Great, thank you, Laini. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat and I'll pose them to Laini for you. If there aren't any questions, if you would like to stop sharing, we could move on to Stephen Burke. And if anyone posts questions, please feel free to address them there, Laini. Thank you. We have 1 minute left and there's a question from Paul. I'd love to know more about how you do the just-in-time software training.
Sure. So just as they're working, for example, on developing their game, sort of they're working on the augmented reality interactive storytelling game, I spend usually about 15 minutes in 2 different classes walking them through how to set up the beginning of the software and sharing some teaching videos with them that they can then look at home. And then they come in the next time with questions and we go over sort of next steps. So it's really sort of short pieces of training that happen right as they are developing one of their particular deliverables.
Great.
Does that make sense?
Thank you, Laini, for that.
Sure.
We're at the end of time, so I'm going to switch over to Stephen Burke from Rockland Community College. Thanks for joining us today, Stephen.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks to the SUNY Center and the SUNY Press for inviting us here today. This is talk a little bit about the work that I've been doing at Rockland with several of my colleagues. I teach in the English department. I also am the Dean of the School of Arts and Humanities for my many misdeeds at Rockland. And this is work that several colleagues, particularly Dr. Katie Lynch and I have been working on with students in the first year writing program. It's a 2-course sequence, and particularly we've been focusing in on students in the honors program. Although this year we've been expanding our work to students, some of the students in non-honors sections. We use in our writing programs pretty much exclusively open text, and we've been working with students in a variety of different ways, both examining text and also increasingly in creating their own open text. So let me move to the sort of 2 major areas I just want to share with you. One is overall our target in these courses, based on a lot of composition research and our own classroom experience, is really sort of helping students in the writing program target transferability of knowledge based on understanding the importance of 2 topics that they often have not spent a lot of work on, which is genre and audience. There's been a lot of well-founded critique of what happens in first-year writing classes that often assigns the dreaded research essay that really doesn't teach a lot for students about how to actually do any kind of research or scholarly work outside of a first-year writing class. And that question really speaks to this question of transferability. In the spring, in particular, we asked the students to select as one of the texts that we're going to work with in class, a Shakespeare play. And we gave them a selection of plays to work on. Students in both 2 sections of the honors writing program and in a section of a non-honors writing program voted on a text, and they came up with working on Othello. we started working with them using hypotheses and gave them some specific goals to annotate the text so that students were creating annotations, discussing things, what this particular word or phrase might have meant to someone in the early modern period, to working on and commenting on significant themes that were in the play. Our goal immediately was to create a critical edition of the play, and we thought this could lead into a press book text, which would include an annotated bibliography and a scholarly apparatus. And we thought, wow, we can do this in say, in a year, which was clearly a ridiculous time frame. But we did find lots of wonderful activity by the students. Our second and allied major work that comes out of the use of hypothesis is really sort of flipping the typical research essay on its head. And we call it the rabbit hole of research approach for the assignment. And it really seeks to bridge a gap and that disconnect that students don't see themselves as practicing scholarly activity. That happens somewhere else. That's the kind of thing that professors do somewhere else. We're just students, but we want to get them actively involved in doing it. So here's just a sample of this one page of the hypothesis analysis that students were doing. We were really pleasantly surprised. In our 3 sections in the spring, students contributed well over 600, close to 650, I think it was 630 individual annotations. Here, just randomly selected, is from Act 1, and they're talking about the introduction of Michael Cassio, Florentine. Why is Iago referred to him as the Florentine, Michael Cassio, using his whole name? And students sort of speaking to the text and speaking to each other, working on it. We have now a large body of work that we will be working on with them over subsequent semesters. So we really see this as truly an open-ended assignment. So we're using this hypothesis to work on their doing this ongoing annotations of the text, which also feeds into classroom discussion. Is a great interplay with what students working on at home, bring it to the classroom. We can drill down into it when we're in the classroom, whether it's actual face-to-face classroom like at the beginning of the spring, or increasingly when we were doing this online. We also asked students then to identify an interesting scholarly article to study. We didn't, but instead of just using and cherry picking information for the article, we then asked them to look at 2 or 3 of the article's sources and how that writer was using, or writers were using those sources. The students then use this to create an annotated bibliography, both of their main article and the sources. But they also were asked then to analyze, do some rhetorical analysis, and we used work like by John Swales and others, which really helps students understand text, that they are not the target audience. They analyzed this article's rhetorical choices, including at least 2 of those sources, and they did use that to do a lot of close reading and analysis, and then connect their ideas to all 3 scholars' perspective and to the text, using that to how does this inform the text, and use that also to build on the annotations that they were doing in hypothesis. So increasingly, we're seeing this as a really, really open-ended work that individual classes, now we dispersed this over 3 classes in the spring, and we hope to do this again this coming spring in classrooms, and to offer those students in spring 21, the work that students did in spring 20, to look at their work, and increasingly to curate the work that former students have done, and to build this into an increasingly sophisticated text that they can continue to pass on, and is truly a renewable text that they can pass on to subsequent classes. So it's a lot of work. I've tried to summarize it in a very short amount of time, and if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. Does anybody have any questions? There's one from Chelsea here. This is a great project, Stephen. I've been wanting to use this kind of software in the history classroom. Does this get unwieldy if you have a big class?
Does it get unwieldy? Well, as you can see, we had 3 classes. They had about in my class in the spring, it was a small class. I had about 15 students. One class had about 25 students. The other class had 20. So we were talking about less than 60 students altogether that were able to use it. So it's very possible to do this. It's also possible that, I think we're going to be working on this, that you can create rubrics as well to give students feedback on their annotations. And we use the annotations to feed into and to be fed, turned by their major research essay that they were working on. But you can also, obviously, just like in a discussion forum, give students very particular feedback and give them rules. And I think as we go along, we're going to be looking at analyzing. Our work is to analyze what students were doing and to help them go deeper and deeper into the text.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions for Stephen? While we're waiting for the questions to come into the chat, John, if you'd like to share your screen. You're getting some kudos in the chat, Stephen. Nice work.
Thanks, Alexis.
We have another minute here for Stephen if anyone else has any questions. If not, we'll move on to John Rocco's presentation. He's from SUNY Maritime. And if you have a question for Stephen, please feel free to post it in the chat and I'm sure he'll be monitoring it for you. Thanks, John. Please feel free to get started.
Sure, thank you. Greetings from downstate, everybody. SUNY Maritime is located in beautiful Throgs Neck, Bronx. We're the only school in SUNY that has a ship, and we're one of only seven American merchant marine academies. And we need to get our ship sailing one of these days. I don't need to go back further. I cheated a little bit on my presentation today. I didn't make slides. I'm using a student project. Now this student project is top of the line. But I'm going to go through it a little bit and talk about some of its backgrounds. More importantly, a little background too. I'm the coordinator of this graduate program in Maritime and Naval Studies. I was pleased to see Chelsea was using archives in her presentation because archives and digitizing archives is a big part of this project. As we're going to talk about it, the two big wings of this project. And again, this can be scaled down for undergraduate work in many different ways, which I'll hope I can point out. So basically, the thrust of this project is the digitization, creation of digital maritime archives, or any archives, its creation in terms of metadata, etc., and its use in digital annotation and digital writing. This project, by Annie Tomita, one of our graduate students, is using Scalar, a very rich annotation project, right? But again, that's, as I hope we can talk about this in terms of tool usage, right? These are tools, whatever works for you, right? I'm glad that Chelsea also brought up the timeline, which is a smaller version of this kind of annotation. Undergraduates jump all over that. Scalar takes a lot more time and input. At the same time, they're very much related, right? This is going to be a very salty presentation, meaning it's of the sea, our subject matter. Annie's project was to document and trace the life and work of American merchant mariners in the years 1920 to 1940. And it was a stunning project for a lot of reasons, not the least of which the creation of all these original digitized archives and their use. But more importantly, Annie, when she was going through this project, had an incredible aha moment, personally for her and for our program, where she actually discovered that her grandfather was the main focus of all of this. Before she even started this, she had no clue. She started this in our program by examining the lives of working sailors. And for those of you who are fans of working sailors, the great text of all of this is Richard Henry Dana's 1840 text, 2 years before the mast, which gave us for the first time in American letters the real life of a working sailor. Annie began with that text, and she began by digitizing a series of archives in our library. And then her mother said to her, you know, your father was a merchant marine. This shocked Annie. Then she did a lot of research, and not only did she find out her father was a longtime merchant marine sailor, he actually was historically significant in terms of this research because of his work later on when the war explodes, World War II, and he becomes a fighter pilot aboard the USS Hornet, a legendary Navy ship, and he had no idea about this. The Hornet, of course, was one of the great carriers its biggest probably encounter was in the Battle of Midway, which spelled the end in many respects of the war in the Pacific. Let me go through a little bit of it too. It's a very rich, and if you know Scalar, a very rich and intertextual project. But I'm just going to jump into the introduction that Annie gives us for this project, and she basically lays out her modus operandi, right? This project, and this is really a part of our entire program. But again, we scale this down into our undergraduate classes. I teach in both milieus. And I'm glad we just heard Stephen talk about Shakespeare, because this really works well for Shakespeare in the sense that Shakespeare demands annotation and demands kind of cultural background. Anyway, Annie's project was intersection of several things, right? Archives, but more importantly, the production of digital archives, which for our students is eye-opening in the sense that you can go into an archive, pick up a piece of paper and examine it. Sometimes you can't because of restrictions, but digital archives enable the student to annotate it by not actually physically touch. Sorry about I live next to a firehouse. By not actually touching the archives, but actually digitizing them, right? At the same time, through magnification processes and through the rotation of archives, many things can be seen that can't be seen normally, right? So we have archives, digital scholarship, and open access publishing, obviously Scalar being that tool. More importantly for Annie, it was the genealogy part of this project that really opened her eyes to the lives of working sailors when she became aware of her grandfather's place in it. If I just, let's click on our first link. She talks about the backgrounds to this project, several books, and our classes in our graduate program. The background is fascinating, and again, it was, if anything, an aha moment for both of us in terms of program and her individual work. But let me go to the sailors, right? If you look at the table of contents, we have the introduction, the modus operandi, the sailors and their ships. The ships, of course, we'll be talking about it, but for us, for Annie, it was the USS Hornet, which again, if you've seen any of the recent Midway movies, is always one of the main proponents of just American victory in the Pacific, a ship that suffered enormous damage and enormous casualties, but which survived the war as her grandfather did in obviously one of the most perilous parts of naval warfare, that's being a fighter pilot on an aircraft carrier. Let's go to the sailors though. Again, Annie's introduction to all this began with not with her grandfather, but with a person, a figure named Cecil Northrop, who she began this project by just digitizing archives of. So she found his diaries, his letters home, his work papers, his discharge papers, his disciplinary papers. Side note, if you know anything about maritime culture, sailors are often get in trouble. And a lot of the process of all of this is disciplinary paperwork about how they're restricted to ships and how they're punished for things like drinking, etc. More importantly, though, Annie was fascinated by the fact that when her mother said to her, your grandfather was a merchant marine, they went up literally to her attic, went through some boxes, found these documents, which Annie digitized and placed into our maritime library archive, the Student Beadless Library. We get into the archive itself. This is her grandfather, and we'll begin Van Horn Morris, and we'll begin just with what she's found out about him. That's her grandfather and her grandmother. These pictures she had known for many years. The family history, though, was an eye-opener for her, to say the least. Again, during these years, right before the Second World War, it was very common for merchant marine sailors and officers to make that quick transition to the United States Navy for obvious reasons as the war geared up. Her research into her grandfather, began with the fact that she didn't know he actually went to a sibling academy of ours, Massachusetts Maritime Academy. She was unaware of that when she dug up his maritime records. All this metadata for all of these archives were produced by the student. And of course, what's great about, what's great about Scalar is the fact that you can just go off on all these wonderful tangents. There's cadet infractions. He was often in trouble for things. Sailors smoking out of bounds. So I was often in trouble for that. Anyway, the stunning part of the project, though, here's the wedding of her grandparents. The stunning part of her project was this. She knew her grandfather was married in his naval uniform. She had no idea about his relationship to the USS Hornet and his heroic service in the Battle of Midway. And again, if you look at the Battle of Midway, one of the pivotal events in the entire war. What's great about Scalar too is we can go off on these little tangents. He has this great link here to probably the most famous document about film document about the war, John Ford's filming of the actual Battle of Midway because he was there. More importantly, this picture was the revelation, right? That's her grandfather aboard the Hornet in 42.
John, I just want to interrupt. You have 1 minute left.
Yes, in 42. But let me get quickly to the end of this, where we have Annie actually reading a letter from her grandfather that she gave at a digital archive conference. Check it out, pre-COVID, people together in a room. But more importantly, the project itself really impacted Annie's scholarship, connected directly to her family. And again, on a smaller level, these bits and tools of this project can be used for many different humanities projects. And I'm glad Stephen just went before me with his discussion of Shakespeare. It works very well for Shakespeare just for the fact that annotation, student interaction with Shakespearean language is vitally important. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Sorry to interrupt you there.
No problem.
If there are any questions for John, please feel free to post them into the chat. He'll respond to them in there. And we're going to finish up with our presentations with Stephen from Alfred State. So Stephen, if you'd like to share your screen.
Okay, I think we're good, yes?
Yeah, perfect, thanks.
Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you SUNY CPD, and thank you everyone coming ahead of us. I think it's really fascinating how we are all focusing on student learning in different ways in which we can look at databases and archives and really kind of changing and transforming the classroom. So I'm going to continue with that a little bit by focusing on some databases, archives, or repositories I've been lucky enough to be associated with, and how I'm using them in both my technical writing and my science fiction literature classes. So I want to present a framing quote from our advisor from 1991, very prescient. "The most profound technologies are those that disappear. They weave themselves into the fabric of everyday life until they are indistinguishable from it." Now, it sounds dystopic in some ways, but it's also a call for us to look at everyday life and look at our relationship to technology a little bit more closely. And so I'm a member of a international group associated with Fabric of Digital Life, focusing on building digital literacy. And so Fabric of Digital Life is hosted by Decimal Labs out of Ontario Tech, and it was started by Isabel Peterson. And it's really kind of got a couple of different goals. So in 2013, Fabric has tried to provide a means to track the emergence of platforms of HCI, such as personal technologies. We've been looking at inventions, entrepreneurship, science fiction films, art, events, military video games, you name it, it's somewhere in Fabric. I think we have stuff going back to just pre-2000. So we've got a couple of goals with this. One, we're starting to see a critical mass of early inventions working towards Weiser's prediction of technology almost becoming invisible because it's so interwoven into our lives. And so one goal for Fabric is to create a space where we can reflect in this phenomenon. And something, that perhaps we've noticed that our students really need that space within which to reflect and analyze. Fabric lets you explore the nature of emergent and emerging media, the discourses that surround it, the ways we participate in it, and the rhetoric that engenders it. We're also looking to examine the effects of emerging technologies on human communication, social interaction, and human thought, and to ask questions like, How might emerging technologies help improve fields like healthcare and education? How can we address those questions within our classroom? And finally, not least importantly though, what's it mean to be digitally literate? So the first application, I'm going to show you how I started using this in my technical writing course and some of the evolution of it since then. January 20th.
Stephen, I don't mean
Yes.
to interrupt you, but you're not actually presenting. You were just staring at the title screen.
Oh, geez.
Thanks. Sorry, I think I was just about to interrupt too. Thanks for doing
No,
that.
thank you. Can you see now?
Yeah. Yeah, you're on the January 20th side.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay, great.
You're not sharing your, like doing the slideshow. You're just showing us the slides with the slide deck on the side, just as an FYI. And now you're showing us the presenter mode.
Yep.
This will work. Don't worry about it.
Okay. Can we still see January 20th?
Yes.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. So January 20th, 2020, back when things were relatively normal. We're going to use Fabric to do the following. To engage in an extended rhetorical situation, we created a rhetorical situation where we had a company called Nash Industries, Robotics and Nanotech, looking for ways to expand their market and to apply their technology. I set myself off as the project manager. They receives weekly video messages from me. And so they're going to work on kind of exploring the website, building some digital literacy, and so on and so forth. Then March 19th, 2020 hit, and that's the day that SUNY pivoted to remote. And instead of simply looking at Fabric of Digital Life as an interesting database, I really sensed that my students needed a situated learning environment and a way to try to make sense of the world. They felt helpless. You know, they went from in-person, they went to remote, they were sent home. And so we created this update where we have been requested by the CEO of our company to use Fabric to try to find resources and inventions that maybe we can help to use to try to combat COVID. And this really kind of helped provide a good focus for them for the rest of the semester. So we applied Mike Markel's problem-solving model, where we identify the problem or the opportunity. And prior to this, in many of our classes, it was a rhetorical situation. The students came up with something, or we would look for a problem or an opportunity on campus. However, we're a small campus, but we run a lot of sections of technical writing. And so there's a potential for proposal or problem fatigue, right? Where the same sort of offices and individuals are being approached over and over again. So Fabric allows me to still have kind of active learning in a situated learning environment, but to try to avoid that fatigue. So we identify the problem or the opportunity, they establish criteria. What do we need to put in our decision matrix to try to figure out whether this is a good idea or not? Determine the options, study each option, draw conclusions, and then present a recommendation report that would look something like this for how they can take their weeks and weeks of analysis and to put a recommendation out there to try to make the world a better place. So I was encouraged.
Stephen, I just want to say again, as you're advancing, your slides are not moving forward.
So I was encouraged. I'm just going to do it old school then.
Yeah. August 24th now.
August 24th. Thank you. And thank you all for your patience as I talk about tech writing and fumble through my slides.
We've all been.
And so we expanded our assignments, and I built the whole course around the database. So they would conduct a rhetorical analysis, kind of trying to figure out some of the characteristics of the database and the website design that work, touching a little bit upon some UX there. They would write an instruction set on how to best find something and to use the database. They would write a technical description of a process, which they found a little tricky. They're much more comfortable writing about a product. And then finally, they would conclude with the report itself. And so we I kind of extended it, as I said in the previous slide, to things like the process analysis. So I model this by saying, okay, find something that is of interest to you in the database. And for me, it would be something like the self-healing robots. And I was kind of fascinated by this and some of the applications for it. Some of what we're starting to do when you create a polymer that can, quote unquote, feel pain or can tell when it's been punctured. And we can think of all the real world applications for this. And I kind of model how they would have to conduct the research for this, and then they would have to design and present a technical explanatory document on that. So that was how we used the database to kind of generate ideas and to situate learning in technical writing. I also, however, and this is some ways, it's also a natural fit, science fiction. So I teach science fiction literature every spring. And while I teach it as literature, I wanted, like Stephen, to kind of create a liminal space and kind of create a space within which the students could look at the short stories and the novels and the films as more than just texts, but to see them as culminations of past, present, and future. And so here's where the digital literacy part came in with that particular course. Ursula Le Guin, late and very famous science fiction author, had a number of these quotes in their introduction to The Left Hand of Darkness, and they kind of helped me frame the science fiction course for the students. So science fiction is described as extrapolative, forward-looking. It focuses on the stuff our dreams are made of. But really, it's kind of describing reality in the present world through metaphor. And so Le Guin throws this challenge, this question out at the end of the introduction, but a metaphor for what? And so we used the text and we used classrooms discussions and we used the database to try to actually answer some of those. So we'll look at texts like "The Star Is My Destination," "Do Androids Dream of Electric?"
But you have 30 seconds left.
Oh my goodness. And that went by really quickly. So they have to go into the database and they have to answer Le Guin's questions, focusing on some of the texts. Fabric drops them in there for me as anchors, and they have to create a collection that we're still compiling using the creation process of identifying a concept, putting together keywords. They have to put together this huge Excel sheet involving metadata, and they're really kind of struggling in a good way with the text, not just as a text, but as a, there's the screen sharing.
Sorry.
No, you're good. As cultural artifacts. And so the goal is to quote Sharon Crawley, unsettle students in more positive and productive directions by trying to transform the literature in tech writing classrooms. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm going to hand the reins back over to Tim here today. Thanks for everybody for staying on time and for bearing with us as we made you stay to the time.
Wow. Thank you so much, Jamie, for your excellent moderation today. There was a lot to get to, and I don't know about the rest of you, but I found this a really highly inspirational session. I learned a lot. I hope that all of you got some really great ideas that you can try out in your classrooms. One of the things that we prepared for all of you today at the end of the session is a survey. As I said at the top of the hour, our hope is that we can figure out ways to continue to build this community of humanities instructors getting together, sharing best practices, sharing ideas, and collaborating. So we've asked you several questions on the survey that we'd love your feedback on. Jamie will be posting that, I believe, in the chat at the end of this. So if you could feel free to take the few extra minutes, we actually are going to finish on time, to go in and complete that survey for us. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much for spending some of your Friday afternoon with us. We hope you have a wonderful weekend and a wonderful rest of the semester. Thanks.
And thanks to everybody for presenting today. You all did a wonderful job. If you want to make sure that your presentations get sent to Chris Price, we can make sure that they're included in the description of the video recording of this presentation today. Thanks for joining us, and thanks to Paul and Tim and the rest of the organizing committee and Chris Price, who couldn't be with us today, for putting this together. I think it was a great opportunity for all of us. I'll post the link one more time here in the chat for those of you, because we're starting to get a lot of chats in there. So I hope to see a lot of participation in that survey. Thanks again, everyone. We finished just in time. Look at that.